Hi, I'm Chris from CodeReviewVideos.com, and in this video I'm going to show you a different way of restricting access to the /login URL when we are already logged in. So this time I'm going to do it using an event listener, and the event I'm going to listen to is a Symfony kernel event called kernel.request. So this is a little bit more advanced, I suppose, but I think it leads to a cleaner implementation. Now again, if you know of a cleaner implementation than this, then do let me know. As I say, I'm always interested in improving my development practices. So the idea will be that we pretty much re-implement the same logic as last time. Towards the end of the last video, I'd created a separate bundle and everything, but I've deleted all that by doing a reset, a git reset head hard, and then the server's back up and running, just to explain where we're up to with that. So I'm going to go ahead and inside my source directory, I'm going to create a new folder called event. And in here, I'm going to create a user login root listener, I suppose would be the best way to describe it. User login root listener.php. This is going to be an event listener that listens to, as I mentioned, the Symfony kernel events of the kernel.request event, should I say. So in the namespace, we're in app bundle, we're in the event namespace. We need to create the class of user login root listener. And in here, we're going to create a function called, you can call this whatever you want, but I'm just going to call it onKernelRequest, as that's the event that we're going to be listening for. And then I suppose I can just exit and just die in there once it comes through. Now this actually gets a get response event, which is a little bit unintuitive. Thankfully, PHP Storm very quickly auto prompts you with the right event name, but because it's on kernel request, you might think it would be a get request event anyway. So we're going to do a little bit more. So before I go ahead with that, I'm just going to create myself a construct function just so that it's ready, because we're going to need a few things in here just to help us get through to the same situation as we were in last time. But I've created that. Now I need to go into app config services, and this is best practice from 2.6 onwards, I believe, is just to create the service definitions inside services.yaml, as opposed to where we used to create them inside our app bundle or whichever bundle we were working in. So listener, we're not in that directory. I could have used the autocomplete there as well. Event user login listener, I remembered at that time. We are going to need some arguments, so I'm not going to keep that in just for the moment. As I showed you, we are going to have a constructor which takes in some arguments. So that's going to allow us to inject certain things, primarily the user, or a way of accessing the user, and also the router, so that we can redirect ourselves off to somewhere when it all works as expected. So we need to set up some tags in here, or a tag. Event is going to be kernel request is where we're after. That's the event that we're listening for, and then the method to call is going to be onKernelRequest. We've already set that up, which is fine, so that's all good. Anyway, we're not getting any warnings here, so we should be good to go. If we hit /login now, I would hope to blow up, which is exactly what we get, and that's because we're effectively any root should blow up at the moment. Yeah, so even if we go to something that doesn't exist, I think that should still blow up. And the reason that is happening is because we're listening to the kernel request, and literally any request that comes through is going to trigger this listener. So that's kind of not what we want. We want to be a little bit more specific on the type of event that we're listening for. So we're going to say the request, not like that. Our request is going to equal event get request. So we're going to be able to get access to the request in progress. And really, we're only interested in one type of request, and that's if the request, the current root, is equal to the Symfony, not the Symfony, the FOSUser security login root. So we're getting the root off the request, and we're saying if that root is not equal to FOSUser security login, I think is the right one, and I will explain why that's the root that we're after. So way back in video 1, we created our FOSUser routing. We imported their roots. As part of that, we have the top one is their security root. I can't seem to find a way to click through to that, so instead go to Friends of Symfony vendor, Friends of Symfony user bundle, resources, config, routing, plenty nested, and then in security, and we've got all these routes. Now I think I covered this in a previous video already as to where these are, but yeah, just so that you're aware, that's the route that we're after, /login. That's the only reason why that's named as it is. So one of the things where, you know, I fully appreciate when I watch videos like this for myself, and someone just says, all right, that's the route we've got to get to, but they don't really explain why. Hopefully that's helpful to you. So what we're saying is, if that route is not equal to this route, as in if this is any other route than /login, then you know what, we don't care, so just return. And so that should now, if we hit that should now fix things, as in, you know, it knows that that's not a route. But if we hit the slash route, that's fine, it's going through. But if we hit here, then let's just put in a blow up, and then if we hit /login, that route alone should blow up, but none of the others. Excellent, that's exactly what we want. So the next thing really is when we go to /login, we are getting blown up. The next thing, as I say, is to check whether this user is currently logged in. If well, should that be the next thing that we check? Let's see. So we need to determine, as we did in the last video, we're going to need to access the token storage. So let's just, but of course we're not going to have immediate access to this because we're not going to be in a controller. So we need to inject it, which is where the arguments comes in. So we're going to say arguments, and the first argument we need to pass in is at token security token storage, which is nice. It's just the first one it remembers for me, token storage. So we can go ahead and set that up now. So token storage interface, and there's two of them here, so just be careful. One's CSRF, one's core. We need the core token storage interface, and then a nice little tip on a Mac, Alt Enter on their initialize fields, let it do the dirty work for me. Excellent. So now we can say, in fact what we'll do is we'll just exit. And if you're wondering actually how I came to know that it was token storage when we've injected that, so how to know which path that actually relates to, as I say, there was two. If we just close out of that and we go to app console debug container, and then return that, so we get a list of all the services that are available to us, all the public services, and in here we've got the security token storage, and you can see that's the full path. So that's why I'm using that one, just in case you was wondering what on earth was going on there. App console server run, and our server should be back up and running. But the tricky part really here is figuring out what to do with this user when we're not logged in, because the way that Symfony token storage is working is a little unintuitive in my opinion. So you've got the token storage interface, and we can dump this out. So let's just go ahead and dump that bit out and see what we're actually getting back so far. So this token storage interface, let's just refresh that. And you can see that when we're not logged in, so currently we're not logged in. If we go to /login, you'll see that we're not logged in. So we've got the token class of anonymous token, and that's exactly what we're seeing when we hit the login. We get our anonymous token. Now the weird thing is, we can't really check anything on here. Like, you can't do a null check because it's obviously not null. But yet checking for the string of username anon full stop is a bit, well, it's a bit meh. So really the best check that we can do is check if we have an anonymous token. So if our token is an instance of anonymous token, then in theory we're not logged in. Just to quickly cover this as well, so if I go to say Symfony, so this is inside vendor Symfony, and then I do in here a find in path, and I do a search for anon dot. So the reason I would do this is just to see how Symfony themselves, how the development team at Symfony are dealing with this, and just give myself an idea of how I might deal with it. And they do check for anon dot, so not in this particular instance, but the point that I'm trying to make is I can't check for like a constant. They've not got like const anon name or whatever that I can check for also. So if they was to go ahead in the future for whatever reason and just change up from using the string of anon dot, then if I was reliant on that, it would break everything in my code. So that's not very good. The only thing that I can really do is check if the token is an instance of anonymous token. So let's try that. If this token storage interface get token instance of anonymous token, anonymous always, anonymous token, then in that case you want to just return. I suppose you would return false as well. If you was writing a test for this, you would more likely do a return with a Boolean value just in case. So at the end of it, if everything goes right, we're going to do a redirect. But if anything else goes wrong along the way, we just want to return something. If you was writing a test for it, which I strongly suggest you do, because this could cause problems in your application if it's just left in there and not checked, then yeah, you would want to have a return value to check. So again, if another check I suppose that I would throw in here as well is if this token storage interface get token is equal to null. Now you could one line that, but it's going to be a bit difficult to read, so it's pretty much a similar check. It's not an identical check obviously, because the first one checks whether it's an instance. So this is going to return a token, but if it doesn't return a token, then these two are approximately the same, but the two different checks for two different things, but a similar sort of outcome, I suppose. Really, the last big check in here is if we are logged in. So let's go ahead and try logging in at this stage and see what we get. So it's just code review and test. And then once we've logged in, like what's the difference essentially to our user? So we get a username password token, but at that point we're not really interested in the token. At that point we want to be able to get the user from that token. So let's go ahead and check that as well. So we'll say if this token storage get token get user. See, now if this returns an anonymous token or the token is null, we already want to have failed by that point. Otherwise we're going to end up probably with 500 errors inside our application at the worst. So you want to make sure that your checks before that are good, so that by the time we do call get user, we're not going to be trying to get the user off a null or something along those lines. Again, you want to be writing tests for this, and I will in a future video cover the way that I would test this as well, using something like PHP spec. So anyway, now when we're checking for an instance of user, the likely one to check for is an instance of FOSUserBundle model user, but you could also check your user entity. The reason I would suggest relying on their user is because your user extends it. So if we go back to, I think it was the first or the second video in this series, we created our user entity. Our user entity extends base user, but our base user is really just another name for FOSUserBundle model user. So we're checking that our entity matches, or in fact, we're checking that the logged in user along the way inherits from there effectively. Now it's not the best. You would potentially want to rely more on an interface, so checking whether you've got that and you're an implementation of the user interface. But what I would say is, because we're dealing with FOSUserBundle and the way that I normally do it, I'm okay with relying on FOSUserBundle in this instance. So I'm okay with relying on that that class effectively, because I know my user is going to extend from there. Again, it's one of those things where it's entirely your call, but in my opinion, I'm not likely to change from using FOSUserBundle, so I'm happy with that, even though it is a bit of a trade-off that you've got to be aware of. So we're not saying if this user is logged in effectively. We don't want that. We're saying if this user is not logged in. So we're saying the alternative of that, or the flip side of it. Because if we are logged in, we want to redirect. So we're saying if we're not logged in. If somehow we've got here but we're not logged in, still return false. And lastly, by now we should be in a good position to redirect. So let's do a return. And this is a slightly strange one. In fact, we probably don't even need the return statement there. We just need to set the event set response. So the event's going to get returned back, and then whatever's on the response is going to get actioned, and our response is going to be a new redirect response, Symfony HTTP Foundation redirect response. And then this is where we're going to need the router. So we injected the router earlier. Let's just double check that we've got our router still. Registration enabled false. What's going on? Arguments, that's not the right route. Security token, yeah. So let's just do this. This router interface generate even, and then the name of the route that we want to redirect back to. So that in this case is just going to be home page. Let's just stick that in. And so what should happen now is if we're logged in, we should just get redirected back to the home page if we try and hit the login route. So we are still logged in. If we hit login, we get redirected back to the home page. If we log out and then try and log in, we can log in. So let's just log in, code review test, and then once we're in, try and hit the login page, redirected back to the home page.